This is How to Listen to Music Part 5, Beginnings, Beethoven 5. This series of videos is an attempt to help you understand more about the music that surrounds you every day and ultimately help you enjoy what you hear. In this fifth video, we will discuss the act of listening by exploring one piece in particular, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. All the samples have been taken from YouTube and the links will be given at the end of the video. When I was a young music student, not many people brought up the idea of actively listening at all. Perhaps they assumed I knew what I was doing, or perhaps it was because we were focused on reading notes, learning theory or instrumental technique. Initially, no one discussed what we do when we listen to music. Not the listening you do as an ensemble player, but the listening as an audience member. No one brought up the idea of there being a difference between actively listening and letting noise happen to you. This is about how to enjoy music by knowing what's going on, by paying attention to what happens in a piece of music. Two composers who addressed the subject of listening were Aaron Copland and Leonard Bernstein. Copland wrote a relatively short but enormously helpful and insightful book, What to Listen For in Music. The unanswered question Harvard lectures from 1973 by Bernstein are now easy to find on YouTube and well worth spending some time watching. What these two musicians say really get you to think. But, and I base this on personal experience, what they say will probably make different amounts of sense depending on your musical education or experience. But more on those two shortly. Enough prep for now. Let's jump in. The very opening of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony contains perhaps the most famous 8 notes in classical music. But we heard a little more than the first 8 notes. What happened after that? This is a tricky question to answer for a couple of reasons. Firstly, there's the question of memory. Remembering what you hear so you can compare it to what comes later in the piece, both in the short term and the long term, is critical for listening. This is part of what is active. But there's also the challenge of language, describing what you heard. It is reasonable to think that we really only need to describe what we hear when we're discussing music with other people, but learning words that are specific to music can be useful as you explore musical worlds. They can be enormously problematic too, but let's worry about that another time. In What to Listen For in Music, Aaron Copland writes, "The really important question is, what does the composer start with? Where does he begin? The answer to this is, every composer begins with a musical idea. A musical idea, you understand, not a mental, literary, or extra-musical idea." Copland is referring here to how a composer begins the process of creating a piece of music. He goes on to describe a number of things a composer does to explore his idea, eventually introducing the word theme, and explaining we should, quote, "always remember that a theme is, after all, only a succession of notes." A composer, he says, tries to find the theme's essential nature, and then he tries to find what might be done with it. And, for Copland, Beethoven symbolized the type of composer who begins with a theme, makes it a germinal idea, and upon that constructs a musical work, day after day, in painstaking fashion. Most composers since Beethoven's day, says Copland, belong to this type. We don't have to agree with Copland, but let's return to the opening of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and see how we might be able to digest some of what he says. If you listen to those opening 8 notes, you might notice they are in 2 groups of 4, each group made up of 3 repeated notes and another, in this case, lower. So what, you might think? Well, if we take Copland's idea that a theme is just a succession of notes and that a composer begins with a truly musical idea, this could be it. Just a few notes, some repeated, with a particular rhythmic and pitch pattern. In the hands of a lesser composer, these notes might not amount to much. In fact, by themselves, they do not constitute much of a theme at all. But in Beethoven's hands, they become something majestic, triumphant, heroic. So here's the point. For composers, at least composers who construct musical works from germinal ideas, it's often not about the idea or the theme, it's about what you do with it. So, returning to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, what does he do with it? Did you notice how Beethoven used the rhythm and pitch patterns of the first 8 notes and created an entire opening to the symphony? This idea, let's call it a motif, which contains both a pitch shape and a distinctive rhythm, is built into a 4-bar phrase and layered in the strings, first like this, then like this. These phrases are rhythmically identical but use different pitches. Incidentally, the first layering results in a C minor chord, which is the tonic triad, and the second layering in a G chord, the dominant, but we're going to try and avoid a harmonic analysis or discussion of the harmony for the time being, just to keep things simple. So far, we have followed by each 4 bars long. Beethoven then shortens the 4-bar phrases to 2 repeated 2-bar phrases that step down in pitch in the higher voice with an answer that steps up in the lower voice, and drives us into a full orchestra cadence or musical close. We then hear a familiar statement of the opening, but only 4 notes, and not the same pitch as at the beginning. 4-bar phrases with layered strings appear again, but instead of the layers creating 2 different chords as they did after the very opening, this time 2 identical chords are heard. Just like the 2-bar phrases that followed our earlier 4-bar string layering, so we hear 2-bar phrases now. But in contrast to the last time, they are followed by rising 1-bar phrases, finally into descending 4-bar phrases in the strings with sustained notes in the winds, and 2 big chords that move us to a new section. The horns here play a familiar rhythm and state a beginning of a new section that continues with a more lyrical 4-bar phrase passed from the violins to clarinet to flute, then back to violins. We repeat a 2-bar segment of it which builds to a musical climax. The section ends with descending 4-bar phrases, but this time the descending pattern is played by the woodwinds and the sustained notes appear in the strings. If you thought the orchestra started from the beginning again, you'd be correct. A convention in classical period symphonies, as well as symphonies and many instrumental pieces through the classical and romantic eras, was for the large first section of the opening movement to be repeated. This was not merely a performance convention. Repeat marks appear in the score. If we keep this convention in mind and add in that this piece is by Beethoven, it is almost a giveaway for sonata form, or first movement form, or sonata allegro form, which is a very typical framework for musical ideas at the time. Sonata form deserves a video in its own right, but for simplicity's sake, the musical material in the piece is organized in 3 sections. The exposition, which is the first large section that is usually repeated, and the section of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony we heard, the development, and the recapitulation. The exposition often contains 2 contrasting themes or groups of themes. Beethoven's symphony is no exception, the first theme being built on our opening motif, and the second the more lyrical phrase. In the development section, the composer will likely take musical ideas presented in the exposition and develop them further, explore new keys, perhaps present new combinations of previously heard ideas, or whatever his or her creative ability permits. In the recapitulation, the first theme and second themes will likely be heard in enough of their original state to be recognizable, but will almost certainly have been adapted. To oversimplify, this is because the exposition usually ends in a different key than it started, whereas the recapitulation's goal is to end in the home key or tonic. You may have realized I've stepped back from Beethoven's symphony to speak of general conventions. To my mind, understanding how a piece compares to others at the time, or before or after, and how a piece fits into its historical context by learning about contemporary conventions, conventions which were created by composers creating actual pieces of music, adds to the overall enjoyment of music. However, one of the best pieces of advice I received from my A-level music teacher was always to return to the music itself. In other words, listen first, read second. This initial and very brief exploration of listening, focusing on the exposition of the first movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, has not provided any harmonic analysis, consideration of what constitutes a melody, musical texture, or even how Beethoven chose to orchestrate his ideas. Nor does this video consider how he develops his ideas through the development and recapitulation sections. And there are 3 more movements in the piece. The purpose of this video was to provide an introduction to listening by alerting the listener to his or her role, i.e. identifying a theme or musical idea, remembering it, and working out what the composer does with it. There are, of course, thousands of great musical works that could keep an alert listener busy for years. Works that will surprise you even if you think you know them well. Works that don't follow the conventions you've come to expect, and therein lies the essence of the true musical pioneer. For now, follow one of these links to listen to the rest of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and hear what invention and creative marvels he has in store.